We're the two teachers.
Where school is always in session.
Andy, today we're looking at public opinion and how we measure public opinion. Nothing more important for government than to know what we, the people, are thinking. And how do they know?
Well, we, the people, is part of our popular sovereignty. And as technology has progressed, we have used a lot of that technology to try to measure public opinion in between elections. Certainly, elections are the ultimate in public opinion polls because those elections determine who our governmental leaders will be in our republic. But in between those elections, we've seen this growth of using public opinion polls to try to measure and then to report about what we're thinking.
Other polls we're seeing right now, Andy, a lot would be these tracking polls where they're tracking statistics on the virus. We want to know information, and polls give us a snapshot rather than having to read through long text. We see numbers on a grid or a chart, and we feel like we're informed. Public opinion polls essential to a healthy democracy, literally.
And let's emphasize here, we're talking about scientific opinion polls.
Yes.
We're talking about polls that use a random sample of whatever universe you're trying to measure. We're talking about polls that will report a margin of error so we can know statistically how viable is this information that we're consuming. We're looking at polls that actually consider different ways to ask questions in different media on which to ask those questions. Certainly, we know there are other polls out there that are not scientific. In elections, we sometimes see kind of that dirty campaign tactic known as push polls. But really, in this case, we're talking about those scientific devices that many public officials use to kind of get a gauge on what the public is thinking as measured by scientific polling.
So, Andy, you're saying that the word poll is not a synonym for the truth, that there are polls out there that aren't reliable, that the veracity of some polls should be questioned, and we should be looking at some of these indicators. What is the size of the sample? What is the margin of error? What questions were asked? And who pays for the poll? All extremely important tactics that we need to use as citizens to make sure that these polls are worth looking at.
There's absolutely. There's definitely a literacy that we as citizens should be aware of when we see all these different polls and some of the websites that are aggregate of all these polls. It's super helpful to look at exactly what we just said. How many people were questioned? We know that national polls, Dan, tend to be actually more accurate than state and local polls, which was one of the reasons why people might have been so surprised by the results of election in 2016 that predicted accurately that Hillary Clinton would win the national popular vote. But when we get to state and localities, ironically, when you're trying to measure the opinion of a smaller group of citizens, it can actually be harder to get reliable, accurate results in polling.
Andy, when I was a kid, my mom would always say, penny for your thoughts. Well, with polls, we actually get to see what people are thinking all the time. Our newspapers and websites and news feeds are filled with polls. And frankly, I'm glad. I want to know what people are thinking. It helps us become a more educated citizenry. We're the two teachers. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.